Hey guys, Tyler here with this week's collection spotlight. This week's spotlight was the 5 most philosophical films in your collection. Some of these films, I'm going to talk about the film as well as the filmmaker, and I'm also going to talk about a few of the filmmakers' other films because I feel like some of the films that I wanted to include in this spotlight had already been included in other people's spotlights, and some of the films from the filmmakers that I don't actually have that I think would have been better fit for this spotlight. So yeah. Here we go. These will be in alphabetical order. The first one is Roberto Rossellini's Europe 51, starring his wife Ingrid Bergman. This film was released in 1952, so this is really definitely a philosophical film for its time, even for a neorealism master such as Rossellini. Granted, this was an Italian film, so it wasn't exactly a Hollywood production, but for the time, it's a very deep and philosophical film because it deals with issues that a lot of films from that time don't really deal with, such as childhood, suicide, such as religion, and the way that people view people who claim to be truly good that aren't part of a religious movement. And also it talks about mental stability, dealing with loss and grief. It's a very, very interesting film because Rossellini himself said that it was basically The Flowers of St. Assisi, which is another film of his, from the female perspective. So what we're watching is Ingrid Bergman turn from a selfish mother who doesn't pay attention to her child into gradually, over the course of the film, this saint-like character who is just a genuinely good person because she sees so much evil in the world and so much pain, and she has experienced so much pain that she wants to keep people from feeling that pain themselves. So it's a very deep musing on goodness and what it means to be good and how to be good in the face of adversity. The next one is La Grande Illusion by Jean Renoir. This is generally considered one of the greatest films of all time, and for good reason. It was released in France in 1937. It stars Jean Gabin and Erich von Stroheim. And the reason that this film is so deep and philosophical is because it was one of the very first anti-war films. It sees war from a very humanist perspective. It doesn't see war from a stance of good guys versus bad guys. It's people versus people. And it really explores how war affects people on both sides of the perceived good versus evil spectrum, and it also introduces characters that could fit into good or evil on both sides. Stroheim's performance as a German captain who is in charge of prisoner of war camps in particular is an extremely deep and moving performance. And there's a scene that, if you've seen the film, you know what I'm talking about, with the flower that really hits home the point of that this is an anti-war film. War is not a good thing. War should never be something that should be reveled or should be trumped up as something that is good, because it's not. And it has devastating consequences for people on both sides. This is kind of a precursor to films like Terrence Malick's The Thin Red Line, which is a film that was in some of your guys' spotlights. If you guys really like The Thin Red Line and you want to see more humanist anti-war films, I highly suggest La Grande Illusion. You will not be disappointed. The third film in my spotlight is Richard Linklater's Slacker. This isn't the most philosophical of Linklater's work. That distinction would go to Waking Life, but unfortunately Waking Life does not have a Blu-ray release in the United States yet, so I'm kind of holding out to see if maybe Criterion picks it up or somebody eventually is going to release that film on Blu-ray. But Slacker in itself is a pretty philosophical film in the sense that well, in a couple of different ways really. First of all, from a filmmaking perspective, it's a very philosophical film because it challenges what a film can be. There is no narrative in Slacker. There's no story. There's no plot line. Slacker simply follows groups of bohemian citizens of Austin, Texas throughout a space of 24 hours, and we visit many different characters and we get snippets of their conversations, and we see how these people think about the world and how they react with the world, and yet they don't really ever do anything. All they do is sit around and talk. And to me, that is part of the philosophy of the film. Linklater himself has talked about what the definition of a slacker is. People think of a slacker as somebody who's a lazy bum, who doesn't want to get a job, who doesn't want to actually participate in life. And Linklater doesn't think that's necessarily a bad thing. He thinks that anti-action is in itself a form of action. It's interesting to think about. I don't necessarily subscribe to that notion. I think that action speaks louder than words. You can talk about things all day long, and while education and trying to make other people see your point of view, it can be productive. I think that actually going out and doing something is actually more productive than anything, of course. But this film is really about people who don't think that action is the best form of action, and it's a very interesting way to look at the world and interact with the world. Film number 4 is To the Wonder by Terrence Malick. Basically, I could have spun a wheel and chosen any of Malick's 6 films to include in the spotlight because they're all deeply philosophical films, as anybody who has watched them knows. The reason I chose To the Wonder is because The Thin Red Line and The Tree of Life have both already been chosen, and I think that To the Wonder is the next philosophical film of his in his filmography. So the To the Wonder, it really follows a lot of the same lines as The Thin Red Line and The Tree of Life. I've spoken a little bit before about how I feel like The Thin Red Line, The Tree of Life, and To the Wonder could all be part of a chronological trilogy. I feel like Malick is really trying to give us an idea of what it means to be an American throughout certain points in history, like how The Thin Red Line took place in World War II, and then The Tree of Life was in post-war America. To the Wonder takes place more in modern times, and it's very deep in that it has a lot of the same musings on love and religion and spirituality that all of Malick's films have. And to see Malick's film is to experience a Malick film, and anybody who has seen any of his films know that. To the Wonder is probably his least lauded film. A lot of people didn't really like it. They think it's too abstract and it tries too hard to be something that it's not. But honestly, I think it just is what it is. It's a collection of images and voiceover and music that combines together to take the viewer on its own journey. And that itself is part of the philosophy of Malick, is how he makes his films, how he guides the viewer to think about things without actually telling them what to think. And to me, that's a very enlightening process. And the final film in my spotlight is Emilio Estevez's The Way, starring his father, Martin Sheen. TFK and I are both fans of this film. I introduced it to him a while ago. We watched it in the chat room and he really liked it. It's a very philosophical film in that it deals with a lot of issues regarding death and life and spirituality, and taking leaps that you wouldn't necessarily take, and letting those leaps guide you and change you as a person. Martin Sheen's character in this film is a very, very uptight, non-adventurous person. His son ends up dying on the path of St. James, which is a famous hiking route in Europe, and he ends up going onto the path himself to spread his son's ashes along the path. And it's about his personal journey, not just physically along the path, but also emotionally and intellectually and actual personal growth. And for that reason, I think that it's one of the most philosophical films in my collection. And I really think that Emilio Estevez is a talented director, and I hope he makes more philosophical films like this, because it really is an emotional experience for me. So yeah, that's it. Those are my 5 most philosophical films in my collection. So yeah, I guess I will see you guys next time. Peace. Next film is La Grande Illusion by Jean Renoir. This is one of the best films ever created. That's a general consensus.